Hey guys, it's Kay from Chaos Anonymous, and I am back today with another episode of r/MaliciousCompliance. Write with blood if I have to? Fine. Requested edit. This took place in Turkey. Long-time lurker, first-time poster. I'm on PC, but English is not my native language. This happened to a classmate of mine, and I was lucky enough to witness it. A couple of years ago in high school, we were going to take a regular exam for a class I don't remember. The exam was right after our recess. Unlucky for us, the teacher that would supervise us during the exam was one of the worst teachers most of us have ever seen. This teacher was also a sub, coming from another high school where teachers could abuse students as much as they liked. My high school had a much higher pay than hers, so she wanted to be a good sub and get hired as full-time staff. Let's call my friend Frank and teacher Karen. We sat down, attendance taken, and Karen gave us the green light to start the exam. Suddenly, Frank says, "Dang it," which gets the attention of Karen, and the following conversation ensues. "Ma'am, my pencil's broken." He was using a mechanical pencil. "Can I get one from a friend?"
No, you can't. I told everyone before the exam that I would not allow pencil or eraser swapping. You should have checked it.
She said this during our recess time, so unless you came 6 to 7 minutes early, you wouldn't know it. "It was working. It got broken when I was solving the first question. Look, I even wrote my name with it."
I don't care. Not my problem.
"So what am I supposed to do then?"
I told you. I don't care. Write with blood if you have to.
At this point, there's a small silence, and Karen has a small smile on her face, thinking she has won over a high school student and satisfied her ego. In my high school, we had 2 vice principals. One of them would be checking every exam room at the beginning of an exam to make sure everything is okay. Attendance, missing exam sheets, etc. And we had glass class walls, so you could see outside pretty easily. Frank, spotting the vice principal, is about to enter the classroom. "Ma'am, can I get up to take a pin from the pin board?" We had one in every classroom.
What? Why?
Frank waits for a few seconds for vice principal to enter, and when she enters, "You told me to write in blood if I have to, since you don't let me borrow a pencil from a friend, and I don't want to get 0 from this exam. I would like to get a pin to put a hole in my finger and write with my blood." Vice principal is shook, looking horrified and just frozen.
What are you talking about, Frank?
"Ma'am, my pencil got broken during the first question. I asked permission from Karen to borrow a pencil from my classmates, but she said I can't. She doesn't care what I do, and that I can use my blood if I want to. So, I wanted to use my blood to write and not get a 0 on an exam." Vice principal looks at the class with a puzzled face as we all nodded our heads, confirming Frank, and some even say, "He's right, ma'am." Vice principal looks mad, but won't say anything during an exam in front of an entire class.
Frank, take a pencil from your friend. Of course you can't use your blood to write in any case. If anyone else needs, they can also borrow pencils or erasers.
Vice principal storms out of the class as Karen throws a death glare to Frank. We learned a couple of weeks later that vice principal tore Karen a new one for being so stupid. Karen was overall a very bad teacher and had a ton of complaints about her within just a semester. At the end, she was sent away 1 week before the semester ended. We were already done with the curriculum, so there was no missed material, and of course, she wasn't hired as a full-time staff. Good job, Frank. Oh, man. I don't understand that. Like, he can't help it that the pencil broke. I get it. I know how teachers can be, but even then they would be like, okay, you have to have 2 number 2 pencils and they have to be sharpened and blah 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 blah. But even then they'd have backup pencils. They would just make you feel bad for having to use one. But to say like, I don't care, you're just gonna get a 0 or something. Oh boy. My dad says he'll pick me up at dark. Well, he hasn't picked me up, so it must not be dark. This happened about 10 years ago now, and I have a good chuckle about it every time I pass the place in my car. I'm a pretty meek guy, so this is probably the only rebellious thing I did in my entire teenage life. My dad owns a farm, and being his son, this meant I had a job when I was a kid, whether I liked it or not. Mostly I understood this, but that didn't mean I had to like it. I resented having to spend entire days of summer vacation, dawn to dusk, in a tractor when it came time to harvest alfalfa, which we did about 4 times between spring and fall. Basically, imagine a teenager with ADHD forced to sit in one place for 14 hours and you'll understand how it felt. Honestly, if I wasn't a total introvert, I might have snapped sooner. So anyway, it's the second day of harvest and it's getting to be late in the afternoon. I've spent about 20 hours total in a hay bind by this point over the past few days, and I asked my dad which fields to cut next, and I asked him when I'll be done, hoping in vain that I can leave and go play video games or whatever. This is where the titular line comes in. I'll pick you up at dark. Little does he know that my little teenage heart is clenching with righteous anger for all this wasted, paid time. So several hours pass and I'm understandably getting pretty irritable. Starts getting dark and guess what? No sign of my dad. At the time, it was becoming a bit of a recurring joke in my family about how my dad was always late, so I knew I was in for the long haul. Then it occurred to me, and the malicious compliance begins. My dad said he'd pick me up at dark. And he wasn't picking me up, so that must mean that it wasn't dark yet. And what don't you need if it's not dark outside? That's right, headlights. So I continue going back and forth on this wide, empty field, squinting as the light continues to fade after sunset, and stubbornly refuse to turn on the headlights. I can easily see the edges of the field, of course, but everything else is blending in pretty well. I start purposefully and accidentally leaving some shark fins, which are what we call the mistakes that haybine operators leave between rows when they don't get any alfalfa. A few small shark fins per field are fine, even expected, but these are on a whole new level. My dad shows up after about 30 minutes of total darkness. I forget our exact conversation, but I do remember the result. After asking me why I didn't turn on the lights and me telling him why, he laughed uproariously, and I still remember it fondly to this day. I never did get any punishment. I'm not even sure he understood the extent of the missed alfalfa. It was dark after all, and it was hard to see in the dim moonlight, but whatever, it was just a few rows. I, however, like to think he was a little proud of me because I was the type of teenager who never got into mischief. I asked him about it recently, and unfortunately, he has no memory of the incident. Oh well. I, however, will probably remember this little bit of malicious compliance fondly for the rest of my life. It might have been pretty insignificant and motivated by laziness, but it was also the first time I really stood up for myself against an authority figure. I think my favorite part of this is like that I don't see it coming. I don't get why like what goes on in someone's head to be like, aha, therefore it is not dark, and I will not turn these headlights on. And I'm just like, okay, wouldn't that make your life harder? I don't get it. But apparently it was just a little thing to stick it to him, I guess, kind of. And, you know, he had his moment, and his dad thought it was funny, so it worked out.
A customer gets frozen milk, eggs, and cheese. First, a little backstory. I work as a delivery driver for a store. People order groceries and the store collects them and I deliver them. We have 5 cars driving on a typical day, and every car has a freezer and a cooling unit on the roof. When people order, they can add a message to the driver. Today I had a customer, and I got the feeling he's a giant a-hole from the way he complained in the message that the food wasn't cold enough last time. Our cars stay around 4 to 7 degrees Celsius. The customer stated that everything that is cold has to go to the freezer. So, in the freezer they went, negative 20 degrees Celsius. At this point, I should mention that he was the last delivery. His food was in the freezer for about 1.5 hours. When I arrived at his house, I checked if the items were frozen. Yes, they were. Milks weren't fully frozen, but enough that you couldn't drink them. I started to unload the bags on his door. He asked why 3 of the grocery bags were cold. I told him that he asked them to be in the freezer. I was right the whole time. He was probably, and still is, an a-hole. Then he just starts ranting about how I should know what he meant and swearing, pretty much. I showed him the printed receipt that stated that every item that has to be cool, I have to put them in the freezer. Then I thanked him and told him to have a good day with the biggest smile I could. He let out a little grunt and closed the door. I could hear him swearing through the door. Then I gleefully walked to my car and went back to the store. He had already called there and complained. The worker who answered the phone told him the same thing I said. You asked for it, and you got it. What's the problem? If he wasn't so rude in the message, I would have probably just put his stuff in the back and made sure they were as cold as possible. For those of you who think this is a little extreme, the message contained only very rude orders and slandering of my colleague. TLDR, rude customer is rude and gets frozen milk, eggs, and cheese, like he asked for. Sorry for possible broken English, not a native language to me. Overall, it's pretty harmless from my understanding, just annoying, but I hear that having frozen eggs is a pain, like a real big pain. I've never had frozen eggs, so I don't know how that works, but apparently that would be the worst part of it, other than, you know, not being able to drink your milk right away. You can use one flashcard on the test. I recently found this subreddit and think it is splendid. It reminded me of something I did freshman year. I've always been a lazy human. Not the lazy that causes other people to hate me for not working on a group project. More of the work smarter, not harder kind of lazy. Anyways, it was the end of freshman year, finals were coming, and teachers were laying out the requirements. My English teacher was giving us a test on all 240 vocabulary words for the final. It was going to make up a considerable portion on the grade. Anyways, she said we could use the front and back of one flashcard. So I had an idea. I didn't know too many of the words, so I just decided to use the flashcard. Most kids had like 8 words on their card, if they even bothered to fill it out at all, but not me. Let me say that it would be challenging for anyone to get me to work as long and as hard as I did on that card. First, I got my ruler and made about 30 lines 1 centimeter apart from one another. Then I took a word list and alphabetized it. I then wrote next to the word the closest matching synonym that I knew next to it. I used the lines to fill in my smallest handwriting possible, every single word. Anyways, I showed a couple of people and they were angry at my loophole and said I was going to get in trouble. Nope. Easiest 100% ever. I still have the note card, and I have just temporarily made it my profile pic. This was 4 years ago, just for reference. So a lot of people in the comments were saying, you know, this is kind of a win-win situation. So apparently teachers will do this to get students like this to think they kind of, you know, cheated the system or whatnot. But obviously this person worked really hard on trying to get everything on there, coming up with synonyms, coming up with ways to kind of fit it on there, and clearly kind of forced them to study really closely. And apparently this is a tactic that a lot of teachers will use to get them to get their students to pay attention and study harder and stuff like that, and kind of engage a little bit. So that's kind of funny. But yeah, I couldn't imagine getting that many words on one flashcard. How did you read it though? Anyway, that is going to wrap up today's video. If you enjoyed it, go ahead and drop a like and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Really quickly, I'd like to thank my patrons. Up on the screen, you should see my face palmers and my crazy K's. Thank you all so much for supporting me in that way. If you're interested in becoming a patron, checking out the original posts from today's video, or sending me an email for possible inclusion in a future video, all of that information is in the description box, so be sure to check that out. And I'll talk to you in my next video. Bye!